Michigan. We're going to kick off the afternoon session with our first talk coming from Scott McNaught from Central Michigan University. He is here with us, which is awesome. Glad to have you here. And he's going to be talking with us about food and predators of Lake Whitefish and Cisco in Lake Michigan. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. I am going to be talking about food and predators of Lake Whitefish and Cisco, but at the early life stage. And this is research that was funded by the Great Lakes Fishery Trust and largely carried out by my graduate student, Kelly Hoyer, who did the work as part of her dissertation. Also, this work is a large collaboration of several tribal agencies, the Michigan DNR, and a couple academic institutions. So Lake Whitefish, Atikamekw, and Cisco, a tuna pea, are native to the Great Lakes, and these two species are quite similar to one another, have very similar life cycles. In fact, if you do attempt to look at the early life stages, you'll be quite frustrated to find out that they're so incredibly similar to one another that it's very hard to make a visual identification, and you have to send them off for genetic identification to be sure. They're really important for commercial and tribal fishery. They have cultural value for the peoples around the lake, and they ecologically link the nearshore and offshore food webs. Now, Cisco population in the 1990s, the Cisco population was low, and the Lake Whitefish population were decreasing, largely due to overfishing and invasive species. Interestingly, and we saw this in Ralph's talk before break, the Cisco in a portion of northern Lake Michigan, the Cisco population started to increase in 2011. But the Lake Whitefish did not. And so it brings up an interesting question. Why are the Lake Whitefish populations continuing to decline while the Cisco populations are rebounding in places? And when you look at the Lake Whitefish over time, you can compare the recruits to age 4 versus the spawners, and you can see that the recruit to spawner ratio has continued to go down from the 1990s to more recent times, and in Lake Michigan and Huron. And this suggests that perhaps it is the early life stages where there's some limiting factor in the environment that might explain the difference in survival of the Cisco and the Lake Whitefish. So what are the life stages? Well, we have sac fry, larvae, and juveniles. And early in the spring, the fish hatch and the sac fry hang out around shallow water, rocky areas. And then, as they grow into larvae, they actually move into the shallow beach zone around our lakes. And so you can just go out there in wadeable water and just see swarms of these little coragonine larvae. And they're feeding on zooplankton, those crustaceans out in the water in the nearshore area. And then in the summer, they grow into juveniles and they actually move offshore, where they still are feeding on zooplankton, but also adding other invertebrates to their diet. While they're in the beach zone area, there are predators early in the spring, and these predators include the round goby and the rainbow smelt. So there are some explanations for why there might be different survival of young Lake Whitefish and Cisco in this beach zone area. And one is that Cisco grow faster than Lake Whitefish, and this might give them greater access to food and a better ability to escape predators. Another possible explanation is Cisco feed differently than Lake Whitefish in a low food environment. The Cisco may have higher capture rates on certain prey types, or maybe a larger mouth size, give them access to different prey. And I should take note here that there is an extremely low food environment right now in the nearshore waters of our Great Lakes, our upper Great Lakes in particular. And this has largely been driven by the zebra and quagga mussels filtering out the algae from the water and not leaving very much food for the zooplankton. So zooplankton populations have gone down. So low food environment. The last explanation for the different survival of these young fish is that Ciscos are less vulnerable to nearshore predators, like the round goby. So I want to explore each of these explanations, and the first one is that young Cisco grow faster than lake whitefish. Do we have evidence for this? Well, our partners collected Corygonians in the nearshore water during the springtime at 10 locations around northern Lake Michigan, Huron, and southern Lake Superior. And what we did is simply measured the length of those fish and extracted their otoliths or ear stones and counted the days that they were alive. So we could age the fish. And so when we relate the length of the fish to age, we can see how fast they're growing at each of these locations. And what I wanted to point out to you is that first we have only 6 locations where we found both lake whitefish and Cisco, and we figured we should use those as comparators. And of those 6, the Cisco were growing faster than the lake whitefish. 5 of the 6, excuse me. Cisco were growing faster. So yes, the Cisco appear to be growing faster than lake whitefish when they're in the same place. And interestingly, the one location, Little Traverse Bay, where the lake whitefish were growing faster is a location where zooplankton food was actually a little more abundant. So maybe under that situation, lake whitefish could outpace Cisco. But right now, it looks like Cisco are outpacing lake whitefish where they coexist. So then why might Cisco grow faster than lake whitefish? And so we were thinking about this, and we were wondering, well, maybe it has something to do with their metabolic rates. Do we know anything about their metabolic rates? And answer is, not really. So we decided, well, maybe we should look at their metabolic rates, and what we did is we simply measured their oxygen consumption in the laboratory, oxygen consumption in a respirator chamber that we designed. And what we did is we looked at respiration measurements at the larval stage and at the juvenile stage for both lake whitefish and Cisco. And we also looked, if you can see on the x-axis here, we looked at their respiration at 3 temperatures, 8, 10, and 12 degrees at each of those stages. And what we noticed with metabolic rate, firstly, was that as you increase temperature, you get increased metabolic rate, not unexpected. And this was the same for both larval and juvenile fish. But the other thing we noticed, which we were really excited about, was that at the larval stage, the Cisco had higher respiration rates than the lake whitefish at 8 and 10 degrees, so that they respire more. At the juvenile stage, there was no difference between their respiration rates. So we concluded that this higher metabolic rate for the Cisco, the larval Cisco, allows them to swim faster and perhaps find patches of food more quickly, perhaps escape predators better than lake whitefish. Our next explanation was that the Cisco feed differently than lake whitefish in that low food environment. And so to examine this idea, we conducted foraging experiments in 3-liter tanks. Most of these experiments were run for 30 minutes. And we looked at the 3 life stages of the lake whitefish and Cisco, the larval, early juvenile, and juvenile. We also examined their foraging on 4 different prey types, cyclophoid copepods, Artemia nauplii, bosmina, and chironomid larvae. And these prey represented what the fish might encounter in the natural environment. And finally, we measured their mouth gape size. So let me orient you to this data graph. I have the 4 prey types. In the upper left, I have the cyclophoid copepods, and in the upper right, Artemia nauplii, lower left, Bosmina, and lower right, chironomid larvae. In each panel, I'm presenting lake whitefish and Cisco capture rates, beginning with the larval stage, then the early juvenile, and then the juvenile. So I'm progressing through their development. And what you might notice, as the fish grow from the larval stage to the juvenile stage, the Cisco become better at capturing cyclopoid copepods, better than the lake whitefish. And as you go from the larval to the juvenile stage, the lake whitefish become better at capturing Bosmina and chironomid. So these two related species are feeding on different prey with different abilities. Then we looked at the mouth sizes and related mouth size or gape to total length, and you can see as you increase the length of the fish, they get bigger mouths. That's not a big surprise. What we noticed, however, was that the Cisco mouth gape increases faster than the lake whitefish, and it begins to do so approximately at 28 millimeters. So as they get bigger, the Cisco mouth gets bigger than the lake whitefish mouth. And so we could say then, at the juvenile stage, Cisco have larger mouth gape than juvenile lake whitefish. Lake whitefish, however, although they don't have a bigger mouth, they have a differently oriented mouth. Their mouth begins to point downward. What does this mean? What does this information from foraging tell us? It tells us that at the juvenile stage, then, Cisco feed best on copepods and larger prey items. And lake whitefish feed best on Bosmina and bottom-dwelling organisms. Interestingly, in northern Lake Michigan, Bosmina abundance is extremely low, even in the really close nearshore areas. And this may give Cisco, young Cisco, a growth advantage over lake whitefish. The last explanation we have for why Cisco may be surviving better than lake whitefish is that the Cisco are less vulnerable to predation than lake whitefish. And so we also conducted some laboratory experiments with round goby. In this case, we used 3 predator sizes, so small, medium, and large round goby, and 3 prey life stages, larval, early juvenile, and juvenile, Cisco and lake whitefish. And we conducted these experiments in large rectangular tanks, and we had a camera mounted over them so we could record what was happening. And we measured pursuits, attacks, and captures by the round goby. And I kind of wanted to show you some examples of this. So in the upper left is a pursuit, and you can see the gobies in the upper right of the tank, and you see the one goby has caught an eye on a prey item and goes after it. So that would be called a pursuit. And an attack is in the lower, and you can see a goby sitting in the corner there, and then it just attacks the fish. So beyond pursuing it, it is grabbing it. That's an attack. And then finally a capture is when the goby goes after a prey item, attacks it, and ingests it. So this is how we recorded all of our behaviors. We tallied them up, and presenting them in this format here. In this case, this graph is depicting the attacks per pursuit by small, medium, and large round goby on Cisco and lake whitefish. And what I want you to notice is that the medium and the large round goby attacked fewer Cisco than lake whitefish. When we look at captures, the large round goby captured fewer Cisco than lake whitefish. We found that really interesting. And so we were wondering, well, why might that be? And so went back to our videos, looked at them a little more closely, and I want you to look at the left screen here, the Cisco. You see how the Cisco were all clumped there? as the goby, with the goby in the tank, and then they move and they're clumped again over in this lower right corner. So Cisco appear to be schooling in response to that predator. And if you look at the lake whitefish, those larvae, if you can see them okay, are fairly randomly distributed, moving around the tank, not schooling at all. So we believe that the schooling behavior protects the Cisco from predators. So when we pull this all together, we think that young Cisco are better able to survive in their first year than young lake whitefish because they have higher metabolism during the larval stage, which allows the Cisco to find food more easily and escape predators. They have higher growth rate, which allows the Cisco to quickly develop that large mouth gape. And that large mouth allows the Cisco to capture copepods and other prey types easily. The schooling behavior allows the Cisco to avoid round goby predators in the nearshore area. It's also important to note that the low abundance of bosmina and other cladocerans in that beach zone may limit the growth of the lake whitefish currently in the system. So, in the future, it would be useful to conduct some more experiments, longer-term experiments looking at the effect of food on the survival and growth of Cisco and lake whitefish, examine the vulnerability of young Cisco and lake whitefish to round goby out in the field, and look at the growth and diet of juvenile Cisco and lake whitefish as they move offshore later in the summer. I would like to acknowledge all those who helped with field sampling, laboratory analysis, fish supplies and maintenance, and of course our funders, Great Lakes Fishery Trust, and I'd be happy to take any questions.